On this episode of Life in a Tide Pool, find out why you should never handle these animals, what you should and should not do if you are stung by one, and learn why these animals mean big business in California.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sea Urchins, and today we're going to explore the tide pools at Gough Island, Laguna Beach, California.
Gough Island is named after Hubbard Gough, who was the first person to claim this area as his homestead in the 1800s. This small island is located just north of the more well-known Treasure Island. This location got its name after the movie Treasure Island, based on the Robert Louis Stevenson's classic adventure novel, was filmed here in 1934. Both these locations have great tide pools that support a large variety of marine life. These locations feature several deep pools that make an ideal habitat for sea urchins. There are over 700 species of sea urchins. They can be found in depths ranging from just a few feet in tide pools to several thousand feet deep. They are very colorful and can be found almost worldwide. There are, however, only two types of sea urchins commonly found in our local tide pools. I invited a colleague of mine, Professor Daniel Zacharel, to help us explore these tide pools and learn more about the vast numbers of sea urchins that live in these pools.
So Daniel, I see this tide pool here, actually a little pool of water in front of me. It's just absolutely packed with purple urchins.
Purple
here, right?
urchins, yeah.
So why are the purple urchins in this pool?
This is a pool that's deep enough and always submerged in cold water. It's a location, you're not going to ever find those urchins up in the upper intertidal regions. You can see that even during low tide, it's getting well flushed with cold, nice cold water. Urchins definitely can't be stranded outside of water. Right. Because they're echinoderms, and they have what's known as a water vascular system. It's unique to this particular type of animal, and that water vascular system is the way that they move. It's the way that they interact with their environment. For them to be stranded out of water is basically a no-go.
They're going to die. They're going to desiccate, and it's going to be bad news for them, right?
Yeah, I mean, they could spend a very little time out of water, but they're really targeting those deeper tide pools.
Right. So I notice all of the urchins here are sitting buried in their little holes in all the rock. It seems like each of them has their own house.
Yeah, they call it a home scar, and there's some thinking that they create that home scar themselves just by the abrasive action of their purple spines.
So Daniel, I want to learn a little bit more about why or some of the functions of the spines that the urchins have. So obviously one's going to be protection.
That's correct. Yeah, and another is going to be, remember that they're living in this environment with a lot of wave forces, and they're living in these home scars, but they're not just relying on their tube feet to attach them to the surface. They actually can use those spines. They can flex the spines in different directions, and they can wedge themselves inside of those home scars.
Again, just to keep them from getting knocked away by the water and stuff
That's
like
right,
that.
yeah.
So I see a lot of the urchins have a lot of other pieces of shell stuck to the top of them too. So is there any specific behavior for that?
It could be that they're trying to camouflage. I guess if they were out of water for a period of time, it could be a way to prevent desiccation stress. And it might just be accidental. It might be sort of like they use their tube feet to catch drift kelp. So maybe occasionally they opportunistically grab, oh, here comes a wave, whatever they wish.
Pools like this, without the water, the temperature is going to raise pretty high. They're going to run into various levels of abiotic stress.
Well, you know, this pool is low enough that it probably isn't, and it's deep enough that it's holding a large volume of water, and it may not change temperature so much. Yeah, because it is getting continually flushed even during this low tide event. Now, if you get higher up and you're in a shallower pool, that could absolutely experience some significant warming.
Sea urchins play an important part in several ecosystems. Ecosystems are interactions between plants, animals, and non-living elements like water temperature and light. One of the more studied ecosystems is between kelp, sea urchins, and sea otters. Kelp uses sunlight and nutrients in the cold ocean water to produce energy by photosynthesis. The kelp forests support a huge number of marine animals that depend on the kelp for food and protection. Urchins will feed on kelp, and sea otters will feed on the sea urchins, among other small animals like crabs, abalone, and clams. In a healthy, balanced ecosystem, each of these groups maintains a stable population level and can withstand minor fluctuations. Certain natural and man-made events, however, will disrupt this balance.
Do they move around at night when they feed, or they pretty much sit here and wait? How does that work?
They will get a little bit more active, but they actually don't even need to leave their home scar necessarily to feed. The targeted food source for purple urchins is drift kelp, and that means it's kelp that is broken off the alga and it gets brought in by the surge. They have tube feet all over the outside of their chest or their body, and they can use those tube feet when a piece of drift kelp comes by. It literally kind of, it's like Velcro, it sort of sticks to them, and then they can use their tube feet to work that drift kelp down under to their mouths.
Almost like this little piece of kelp sitting on that one right there.
That's exactly right. We could be watching a feeding event right now, actually. And so what'll happen is that they'll work that drift kelp around to their mouth, which is on the underside of their body,
right,
and then they can just go to town. So these urchins that are hanging around in this, you can see that quite a few of them have pieces of drift kelp attached.
Yeah.
So they really don't have a need to go roving for food. But purple urchins have a really interesting habit, and that is that sometimes if the kelp abundance gets really low and there's not enough drift kelp, they will take on a roving behavior where they'll come out of their home scars, and they'll start to graze on anything that is growing on the rocks. So they won't restrict themselves to the drift kelp anymore. They'll graze
on the microalgae and those other algae that we see all over here,
and
like
little invertebrates that they encounter, everything that they encounter. So they could take an area like this and effectively turn it into a barren area.
This roaming behavior in urchins can be triggered by a variety of events. El Niño events are a great example. El Niño events increase the temperature of the water. This increase in the water temperature will cause the kelp to grow more slowly and eventually die off. The urchins no longer have enough food and will start to feed on everything else around and create a barren ocean floor devoid of the usual marine life. The urchin populations will eventually decline as the food sources are consumed. Sea otter populations will also diminish as the urchin populations decrease. Sea otters will also begin feeding on other animals, including abalone, crabs, and clams, to supplement their diets. When the El Niño event subsides, the water begins to cool, the kelp forest will begin to grow again. The increase in the kelp will lead to an increase in the urchins and eventually sea otters, and the ecosystem will stabilize once again.
If you look really carefully at the bottom of the tide pool, every once in a while, if we get into a deep enough tide pool, we might see a second species of urchin, the red urchin, usually associated more with the subtidal, so underwater, and it's actually a harvested fishery species. So
harvested for what?
Harvested actually for the gonads. Yeah, that's
right. So it's sushi, I bet, or
yes,
stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, most of that's harvested in Southern California is actually exported into Asian countries.
Commercial sea urchin harvesting is big business in California. I went to visit my friends at Catalina Offshore Products to learn more about this industry.
This is Dave Rudy, the owner of Catalina Offshore Products. And he's going to tell us a lot more about how he got started in the sea urchin business, how he started Catalina Offshore Products, and at the end of our little talk, we're going to go on a really great factory tour of this marvelous facility. So Dave, thanks for joining us here today.
Sure.
How did you get started harvesting sea urchins?
Kind of an interesting story, but when I was going to college at UC Irvine back in the 1970s, I was a sport diver and I'd always go diving in the ocean just for fun. And I'd see lots of sea urchins out there, and at the time, the dive clubs were always saying, go kill the sea urchins, go kill the sea urchins, just smash them, because they're a problem because they're eating up the kelp bed. And what had happened is the number of sea urchins had gotten so high in the kelp beds that they were eating up the kelp beds. They were hungry, they were forming fronts and knocking down kelp beds, and so it was an issue back then. And anyway, it turned out there became an interest in Japan to buy these sea urchins. So I saw an article in the LA Times in the mid-1970s that the Japanese were going to buy the sea urchins for 7 cents a pound. I thought, well, that's a great solution. Instead of killing them, let's sell them. So that's how the industry got started.
Okay.
I got my first experimental gear permit in 1974. I think the first sea urchin was harvested in California in 1971.
Not by you though,
No,
right?
not by me. No, I started a few years later.
Okay.
Then around 1977, I set up the company, Catalina Offshore Products. I was diving for sea urchins during the winter months when the buyers wanted them. I was diving for seaweed during the summer months. I was at Catalina Island diving for seaweed, drawing the seaweed at Catalina, and that's why I called it Catalina Offshore, because I was diving on the offshore side of Catalina for seaweed. And then I'd do sea urchins during the winter months when there was a market for them.
What was it like harvesting or fishing for sea urchins back in the day? You probably didn't have high-tech gear we have now, so what was it like?
Right, we were learning as we went, so really didn't know how to do it because there was no precedent. First time I did it, I just took some trash cans down to the bottom of the ocean and started putting the urchins in the trash cans. It didn't work out very well because the surge was so strong and they kept on moving around, so I had to try something else. And we heard of a guy from Santa Barbara that had invented a bag by taking rope and stapling it together and making a bag so we could take it underwater. Later on, we got net from the tuna boats, and the leftover tuna mesh we fashioned into nets using PVC and using steel pipe. So over the years, we learned how to make, and the same with the rake. Originally, we used a garden rake, and then later on, we had custom rakes made so we could harvest the urchins.
So what is a rake? How do you use a rake in the harvest?
So a rake, I mean, as you can see, they're spiny. You don't want them getting stuck in your fingers.
Right.
So we have most of the guys have built a rake that's an extension of your arm and is like this to grab the urchins. And then you grab the urchin, you throw it in your basket, and you float it up to the surface and bring it back to the boat.
Now, can we only harvest urchins by manual labor, manual divers? Can we do it by machines, or is it just by people?
It's all by divers, it's all selective, and we have a size limit, we have limited number of days, limited number of divers, and so the divers have to select the proper size. They have to be 3 1/4 inches in diameter, plus they have to look for the right quality. So not all the urchins are good. If they're getting food, they're going to be good, but if they're too far away from the kelp, they're not going to have any uni inside them, so they're worthless to harvest.
So these are, I know, red sea urchins.
These are red sea urchins.
What's the difference between these and the purple ones?
So purple's a different species. These are Strongylocentrotus franskinus, and little ones are Strongylocentrotus purpuratus. The purple ones only get about this big. They've got shorter spines, and they do have uni in them. It's just a lot more work to clean them. It's more work to harvest them. It's more work to clean them. Because of the size. These are about 1 pound each.
Wow.
And the little ones are about 10 to 1 pound. So it's the labor of harvesting and the labor of processing is much greater for the purple urchins. That's why generally they're not harvested.
So Dave, if you're ready, I'd like to go tour your facility and see actually how you process these seeds.
We have these beautiful red sea urchins. This batch was harvested off the San Clemente Island. We also get a lot of loads right here out of San Diego. So these red sea urchins are harvested by divers. They select the size and the quality, and they come into Catalina Offshore where they're split in half here. I'll show you how it's done. As you can see inside, we've got the uni and a stomach and a mouth, pretty basic organisms. So here you can see the sea urchins being processed to the next step. We're spooning the sea urchin out of the shells and putting them in the baskets, and they're going to run down the line over here. They'll separate the stomachs out. Here we have the semi-processed sea urchin with the stomach attached, and we're going to do the next step here by removing the stomach from the uni. Pretty simple process here, but quite labor intensive. Here at the next step of the process, here we've got the uni all cleaned up. We're just letting it soak in the cold salt water for a little bit before it goes to the next step. So this is the next step of the process where the sea urchins have been in the processing tank for about 30 minutes. We pull them out now and we're going to drain them with paper towels. The ladies have lined them up so they're all ready to be dried out. So as you can see here now, the ladies are drawing out the uni with the paper towels. The basket just came out of the tank, and we're putting a paper towel in between each one, and then they'll flip them over, and then we'll send them into the packing room for packing. Okay, now we have the finished product. This uni is packed on a bulk sheet. This is our California Gold. Pretty amazing product. Really good eating. We've also got our premium grade right here. Very similar, same freshness, just a little bit softer texture. All right, so here's that same bulk sheet of uni, all nicely packaged up. Here's one of the local sushi bars will be coming to pick this up today. Here's some other bigger packages. There's some of the other shipments that are going to go out of town. We ship all over the United States, and we also ship into Asia, Japan, and Taiwan.
Preserving the marine environment and ensuring ecosystems like the kelp forest continue to thrive is an important aspect for any coastal community. There are several great organizations that help protect the marine environment. One organization in particular has made significant progress in promoting marine and tide pool safety and education. I had the opportunity to chat with Christopher Keene of the Laguna Ocean Foundation to learn more about their program.
Tell us about the Laguna Ocean Foundation.
Well, the Laguna Ocean Foundation was started back in 2003 by a group of local residents in Laguna Beach who had realized that we had lost so much of our natural resources. We weren't seeing the shells, we weren't seeing the animals that we normally did. So they formed a foundation to try and educate the public about the valuable resource that we have, the types of animals that are in the tide pools, so that we could protect the area and to enhance this marine reserve, this natural resource.
So what are some of the functions of a tide pool educator at the foundation?
Our first job is really just educating the public. And one of those things is to talk about that this is a marine reserve, and to tell them, the people that come out, about the tide pool rules, how to be a good tide pooler, not to collect things and to observe things that are in the water with our eyes. We have specific rules about a marine reserve, about not being able to take things and not disturb the animals. But what we realized is that if you educate the public about the types of things that are in the tide pools, the types of animals that are, everyone becomes much more aware of these little critters and the great creatures that are there. And they will be much more willing to, if they have an understanding of how delicate this balance is that we have, this great resource that we have, they will be much more willing to protect it and for future generations.
So if they understand it, they're probably going to tell their friends and family, hey, you know what, this is such a great environment, we need to protect this, right? So that education is going to go a long way.
This is absolutely, we can't hit everybody that comes down to the beaches here, but we do know that if we talk to one person, we talk to a couple of people, the word spreads out. Kids are the best at this. They come down and they will spread it among their friends, and they become much more ecologically aware.
Right. Well, I think the Laguna Ocean Foundation is a wonderful, wonderful program, and for me personally, my observation, I think it's already having an effect in the environment. I think it's having a very, very positive effect.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's true. We hear it all the time now. In fact, I was speaking with a dive instructor this past week. He brings his classes out to our coves here, and he was mentioning that they're seeing many more fish, more schools, more diversity of fish, and larger animals, which is really indicative of a healthy environment.
Sea urchins are pretty common in places like Gough Island and Treasure Island. Visitors, however, are not allowed to touch or handle these animals in order to preserve the environment. Visitors are, however, and even encouraged to touch animals like sea urchins at some of our local aquariums. I had the opportunity to visit the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium, where I met with the director of the aquarium, Mike Schack.
I see there's two different types of urchins in here. I see the red sea urchin, but I also see a lot more purple urchins in here. Tell me the difference between the red and these purple urchins here.
Well, the color isn't always the best thing. The purples are always purple. However, the reds can be, as you can see, virtually a black. It's very dark,
I see that one over here.
maroon. Certainly they can be a little reddish, as you can see from this one right here. And they are different species. They're not one being a baby of another one. They're totally different animals.
So what do these urchins eat, or what do you actually feed them? How do you feed an urchin?
Well, we feed them kelp, which is exactly what they feed out in the ocean.
Okay.
So they love eating kelp.
Do they move around a lot? Do they like day or night, or how does that work with these animals?
They do move around a lot, but it's very slow. So the best way to see an urchin moving is to have a camera on it and then speed that camera up. And you can see they really move quite a bit.
One finger touching only, I can just go ahead and touch in here. Okay, so
Absolutely.
I'm going to go ahead. So now,
Oh,
so what happened here? This thing actually moved at me.
That's right. What's going on there, in fact, when the youngsters come and visit us, we'll tell them that the urchin is trying to give them a hug. And yet what's happening here is it's protecting itself. So it's taking its spines that were laid down for the most part because there was no stimulus to tell them they were in danger. And when you touch them, that was danger to them. So they put those spines right up to keep you away.
So I'm sure this one's oh, see, look how fast it moves. I didn't know they actually move so fast.
It's a pretty fast reaction for those spines moving, isn't it?
Wow.
Besides the long, sharp spines, sea urchins have a second means of defense. Sea urchins, like sea stars, have tiny structures called pedicelaria that cover their outer shell. They are only a few millimeters in length and not easy to see. The pedicelaria are essentially tiny jaws located at the top of the stalk that will actively defend the urchin against any threats that may get past the outer spines. In some species of urchins, the pedicelaria will inject a venom as well. Sea urchin stings may cause skin irritation and can lead to more serious infections if not treated soon. Contrary to popular belief, urinating on a wound has never been scientifically proven to help treat the wound. Soaking the wound in hot water to break down the toxins is the preferred method of treatment.
What would, so in the natural environment, what would actually eat one of these urchins here?
You know, the biggest predator of urchins, the one that eats the most, are sea otters. They're really good at eating urchins. And you may know that sea otters are not as abundant as they used to be back in the day. They were fished down because of their pelts were so good.
Right,
We still have them living thanks to a lot of hard work by people, but they aren't along their whole range. So here in Southern California, where they don't occur anymore, urchins have lost a main predator, which means they have proliferated dramatically. And that's caused some real stress and strain on our kelp forest population.
So I remember when I was actually looking at these things, I saw what these little finger-like things coming up at me. It's like, I see one right here.
Right.
What is that right there?
Those are called tube feet. And they're under hydrostatic pressure, so the animal has the ability to make them long. Also has the ability, there's pads at the end of them that can create a suction so that they're hanging on. That's one of the reasons they're adapted to living in the tide pools where there's a lot of wave action. They can hang on with literally hundreds of those.
So speaking of adaptations, so the tube feet can hang on for wave actions, and I think the spikes here obviously are for protection. I can see it moving here. What are some of the adaptations that these urchins have that they have to help them live in this environment?
Well, one of the things, the little purple urchins have the ability to kind of live in depressions. So that makes it even easier when waves come in. They can create the depressions themselves in softer rocks, right? There's even reports that they can eat into steel, but they're not actually eating into the steel. What they believe is happening is as the steel rusts, the animals are able to chew away the rust. They're not actually eating the rust.
I see.
And create a depression.
One last question. So if I want to go see some of these urchins out in the wild, how would you suggest people go actually find them and look for them? Because I know they're not always the easiest things to find, right?
That's right. You find them in crevices, rock crevices, but at low tide. So you're not going to find these animals at a high tide or even a medium tide. You need a pretty low tide.
Right.
You will see the purple urchins first. And then as the tide goes even farther out, here in Southern California around the holidays during the day, then you can see some of the big red urchins.
So I might put my hand in here, and this water's pretty cold. So what temperature do you actually keep this water at here?
We keep our water at about 58 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 14 or 15 centigrade.
Okay.
We do that year round, even though in the wintertime it's certainly that cold and a little colder.
Yeah.
During the summertime it can get up to even 65 or 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
So do you warm the water then to keep it close to the ambient, or is that what you guys do?
We don't, Casey. We keep it the winter temperature year round. And the
right.
reason is that cold water keeps oxygen better,
Right.
so it's healthier for them.
Right.
Also, they tend to have less bacterial growth and other parasite growth if the water's kept cold.
All right.
The animals tend to live at the upper end of their temperature tolerance. So
I see.
keeping them colder is a good thing for them all the way around.